new Dragon capability that SpaceX has had in development. Now, as I mentioned at the top of the show, Dragon will be performing some additional tasks during this mission in addition to its primary cargo mission. During the CRS-31 cargo resupply mission in 2024, Dragon successfully performed a reboost test for NASA that demonstrated Dragon's ability to help maintain the station's current altitude. That test helped inform plans for CRS-33, where Dragon will fly an extended mission and repeat the demo with a modified trunk. This modified trunk contains an independent propellant system, separate from the spacecraft, which fuels 2 Draco engines. Now, the reboost tests will begin in September, with a series of burns planned periodically throughout fall of 2025. Testing these added capabilities will provide NASA with additional options for station operations in the coming years. Now, many SpaceX teams contributed to this new capability, from propulsion, flight software, and guidance and navigation teams in Hawthorne, to testing and qualification in McGregor, Texas, and of course our integration and launch teams based out of Florida. This additional hardware makes CRS-33 a unique mission to look forward to. Now let's head back to Joseph over at JSC for a look at the advances being made possible by the space station. Joseph?
Thanks, Zach, and that's right. For nearly 25 years, the International Space Station continues to stand as a possible symbol for what's possible through collaboration and innovation. Since November 2nd of 2000, humans have lived and worked aboard the orbiting laboratory, continuously pushing the boundaries of human spaceflight and scientific discovery. The station has welcomed more than 280 people from around the world. In fact, with Crew 11 recently joining at the beginning of the month, now 290 they have hit, and supported over 4,000 research investigations, leading to breakthroughs in medicine, materials, and technology that benefit life on Earth and future missions deeper into space. It's inspired millions of students through education programs and demonstrated the strength of international partnerships. As we look ahead to the 25th anniversary of continuous human presence this November, the space station remains a powerful example of what humanity can achieve together. The International Space Station, 25 years of innovation, discovery, and the enduring spirit of exploration.
And liftoff. International Space Station is underway.
We are in the golden age of the space station right now in terms of the return on investment and what we're able to do there.
One of the great legacies of the space station is not just going to be science, but very importantly, the international cooperation. This is perhaps most prominent, international cooperation for exploration.
Such an awesome milestone to be celebrating this year. Now, earlier this year, following 6 years of successful recovery operations on the East Coast, SpaceX relocated all Dragon recovery operations back to the West Coast. When Dragon returns to Earth, it will be heading to one of the 3 targeted sites supported by SpaceX and NASA. All of these sites are located off the coast of California, nearby either Los Angeles, Oceanside, or San Diego. Spreading the supported sites across multiple locations helps to maximize the return opportunities and lowers the chance we'll have to waive off operations due to bad weather. NASA and SpaceX jointly select our splashdown locations, and the selection process works with a lot of different variables, including the space station's orbital trajectory, what landing sites are available and have favorable weather, and how much free flight capability Dragon has for the trip home. All of this is to ensure that the time-sensitive returning science and samples on board are delivered to NASA safely and on schedule. And while we're on the subject of science, I'm going to send you back to Joseph at NASA JSC to take you through what's on board Dragon for CRS-33. Joseph?
Thank you very much. And yes, continuing scientific discovery is enabled by missions like this morning. Dragon is carrying over 5,000 pounds of cargo, including critical scientific hardware and samples. The science aboard Dragon represents months, and in some cases years, of participation by dedicated scientists and engineers. Here are some of the highlights of what's inside Dragon this morning.
SpaceX is set to launch its 33rd resupply service mission to the International Space Station, carrying science investigations to further NASA's missions to deep space and benefit life on Earth. 3D printing and microgravity makes it possible to manufacture more uniform and stable structures that cannot be produced on Earth. The InSpa Auxilium bioprinter will 3D print an implantable medical device that could deliver drugs to support nerve regeneration. This space-printed implant may be a viable alternative to current treatments for patients suffering from nerve injuries on Earth. Bone loss is one of the major problems with aging on Earth and a well-documented concern for astronauts on long-duration space missions. The microgravity-associated bone loss B investigation will observe bone marrow stem cells, which are known to play a role in making and repairing skeletal tissues. Results may improve countermeasures and treatments for bone loss in humans on Earth and in space. The European Space Agency will continue producing metal objects in microgravity using their metal 3D printer. After successfully printing 4 small parts on station, researchers have designed new cube-shaped specimens to further evaluate the printer's performance. Testing 3D printers in space may expand the possibilities for in-space manufacturing and maintenance on future missions beyond low Earth orbit. The winners of NASA's Vascular Tissue Challenge will study how bioprinted liver tissues containing blood vessels behave in space. Insights from this study could shed light on how small blood vessels form in engineered tissue, advancing the space-based production of tissues and organs used to treat patients on Earth. These are just a few of the investigations making the journey to the orbiting lab. Discover more at nasa.gov/ISS-science.
Some really exciting experiments on board this mission. Now, coming up shortly in the countdown, the Transporter Erector, or TE, will begin to retract away from Falcon 9. That is the large truss structure you see standing next to the rocket. Now, that TE is hinged at the base and connected to the launch mount beneath the first stage. First, we'll see those clamp arms open around the second stage, and then the TE will begin to pivot back, slowly swinging away from the rocket. It'll reach full recline by T-minus 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Now, you may also hear the TE called the strongback, and it's the same structure, just a different name. And the TE does a lot more than just lean. It rolls Falcon 9 out to the pad, raises it vertical, and stays connected through the final seconds to launch. It also provides fuel.
Engine chill has started.
And good call out there for engine chill. The TE also provides fuel, power, telemetry, and command connections between ground systems and the rocket. Now, the booster flying on today's mission is flying for its 7th time today, having previously supported NASA Crew 10, Bandwagon 3, O3B, mPower 7 and 8, and 9 and 10, and 2 separate Starlink missions. We're just about 2 minutes out from starting to see those clamp arms open around the Falcon 9 second stage.
Stage 1 RP1 load is complete.
And you just heard that call out there for Stage 1 RP loading completion. This means that the fuel side of the propellant equation is done for the booster. We've got some absolutely amazing views of our launch pad there. And you may have noticed those white clouds venting from the rocket. That isn't smoke, it's actually condensation. And as the liquid oxygen warms slightly inside the tanks of the rocket, some of it boils off. That gas gets vented to manage pressure. And when the vented oxygen hits the warm, humid Florida air, it instantly condenses into clouds. It's sort of the same principle as your breath on a cold morning, just on a much larger scale. Now we're just about 40 seconds away.
Tanks are pressing for strongback retract.
And there's that call out.
Dragon is in terminal count and is on internal power.
And both good call outs there. That first one was a call out from our prop team that the tanks are being pressurized to enable the TE to begin to retract. So coming up in just a few moments, we will see those clamp arms begin to open around the second stage. And those clamps help stabilize the second stage during fueling. They also prevent movement in high winds. And once they're open, the rocket will be fully free at the top.
Strongback retract has started.
And there's that call out that strongback retract has started. We should be seeing those clamp arms opening around the Falcon 9 second stage. And there you can see those clamp arms opening. Now once they are fully open, we'll then see the strong back swing back away from the rocket. And there you can see that strong back moving away from the Falcon 9 vehicle.
And as we continue to follow along with the countdown, the range continues to be green. We're still monitoring the weather as we speak. And if for some reason we do not launch this morning, we do have a backup opportunity as early as tomorrow, Monday, August 25th, with the launch time of 2:22 a.m. Eastern Time as we continue along with this morning's countdown.
Stage 1 LOX load is complete.
And there's that call out for stage 1 LOX loading. Now we should be hearing a call out shortly from now that the second stage is also fully loaded. And at that point, Falcon 9 will be fully loaded with 1 million pounds of rocket grade kerosene and liquid oxygen. We should be hearing that call out for stage 2 LOX load completion in just about 10 seconds from now. Now the tanks are also pressurized using helium, and that helium is chilled too, so it stays compatible with the cryogenic plumbing.
Stage 2 LOX load is complete.
And there's that call out for stage 2 LOX load completion. Now at this point, Falcon 9 is now fully loaded with rocket grade kerosene and liquid oxygen. Now, as I was saying, the tanks are also pressurized using helium, and that helium is chilled too.
Dragon is in auto idle.
Good call out there. That helium is chilled too, so it stays compatible with the cryogenic plumbing. And during flight, that pressurization helps force propellant into the engines as the tanks empty. Now at T-minus 60 seconds, Falcon 9...
Ground gas closeout.
Another good call out there. At T-minus 60 seconds, Falcon 9 will enter startup, and at that point, the rocket's onboard flight computers will have taken over. And from there on out, the countdown will be fully autonomous. And then just inside of T-minus 2 seconds, the 9 Merlin 1D engines on the Falcon 9 first stage will ignite. Once they're at full power, Falcon 9 will lift off the pad and begin its climb to orbit.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
And there's that...
Dragon is in countdown.
There's that exciting call out for startup and Dragon countdown, and both stages of Falcon 9 are now being pressurized for launch. The range also remains go for today's mission. Now we're just waiting for that final go from our launch director.
Launch director, go for launch.
And there it is. We are go for today's launch of Falcon 9 and the CRS-33 mission. So let's listen in to the final seconds of the countdown.
T-minus 30 seconds. T-minus 15 seconds. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition. And liftoff. Go Falcon, go Dragon.
And liftoff. NASA's SpaceX's 33rd Commercial Resupply Services mission is on its way to the International Space Station.
MOD chamber pressure is nominal.
Great call. Is everything nominal, and the vehicle has begun pitching downrange to begin its journey to catch up to the orbiting lab.
Now, in just a few seconds, we'll be throttling the engines down in preparation for max Q, which is the period of maximum aerodynamic pressure during ascent. This is a critical moment during flight because the combined stresses caused by Falcon 9 accelerating through the atmosphere and the ambient static pressure are...
Falcon power and telemetry nominal.
And good call out there for good telemetry. And that is when the ambient static
Falcon
pressure
9 is supersonic.
are at
Max Q.
their greatest. We also just heard that call out for max Q. Now, to help go from vertical to horizontal, the first stage performed a pitch kick just after liftoff, about 10 seconds into flight, that maneuver known as a gravity turn. The engines gimbal a small amount, and that slowly turns the first stage from going straight up to going horizontal with the help of gravity, and eventually we will be roughly horizontal to Earth as we achieve orbit. Now, the rocket typically needs to go 17,500 miles per hour horizontally in order to avoid being pulled back down to Earth and get into orbit. And you can track our progress to orbit by watching the left-hand corner of your display, which is currently showing the first stage velocity and altitude. Now, coming up shortly, we'll have a few events happening in quick succession, starting with MECO, then stage separation, and lastly, SES-1. And we should hear all of these called out by mission control. Main engine cutoff, or MECO, is the point during the flight where we shut down the 9 sea-level Merlin 1D engines on the first stage. Shortly after that, stage 1 and 2 will separate from each other, and the first stage booster will begin its trip back to Earth. And today, the booster will be targeting a landing on our drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas, which is currently stationed in the Atlantic Ocean, about 400 miles downrange from the launch site. Finally, second engine start 1, or
Falcon 9 is on a nominal trajectory.
And good call out there from GNC. Finally, second engine start 1, or SES-1, is when the Merlin vacuum engine on board the second stage ignites. And we should hear this series of events starting in just a few moments.
Stage separation confirmed.
About 2.5 minutes in. And there you can see the great quick sequence of events, the main engine cutoff, the stage separation of the first stage booster, and that Merlin engine on your right-hand side igniting for the second stage to continue to push the cargo Dragon as it continues on into orbit. Now 2 minutes, a little bit less than 3 minutes into today's flight, still about 5 more to go as it continues its chase upward to catch up to the International Space Station. On your left-hand side, you can see that first stage making its way back to Earth, and that's where they will begin the entry burn here shortly, which we will relight those 3 Merlin 1D engines on the first stage, and that will start with the center engine, followed shortly by 2 others, which is similar to pumping the brakes to slow down a vehicle as it passes back into Earth's atmosphere. And we need to do this to slow down to reduce re-entry forces, which then helps us recover and reuse that first stage. And again, this first stage booster looking to land for the 7th time. Now approaching 4 minutes into today's flight, just shy of halfway into powered flight. As you can see, the continued speed on the right-hand side to climb for that stage 2. And the Dragon spacecraft and the altitude also increasing by the moment. And we'll keep an eye out on that left side, that first stage booster. But there you see that Merlin vacuum engine performing now just past 4 minutes into today's burn. Now for the first stage during the entry burn, Falcon 9 will fire its Merlin engines, but the vehicle is still moving really fast. It causes it to fly through Merlin's exhaust gases, also known as the rocket's plume, and that'll deposit a layer of soot on the vehicle, which is why our flight-proven vehicles for SpaceX look the way they do. And that soot comes off the carbon-based fuel that Falcon 9 uses with each flight as the soot builds up over time. But now we're continuing to monitor that second stage Merlin vacuum engine continuing to perform as we have about 4 more minutes left into today's flight as it's now climbing well over 10,000 kilometers an hour and reaching an altitude just shy of 170 kilometers. And as you can see on the timeline, we're coming up quickly, about 50-ish seconds away from the entry burn of that first stage booster. You can see the telemetry of that first stage, the speed and altitude as it continues to make its way back towards the Florida coast. But for now, we'll keep our eyes on that second stage Merlin vacuum engine continuing to power the Dragon cargo spacecraft, flying for its 3rd time, delivering a key cargo and supplies to the International Space We're now coming up on about 30 seconds from the beginning of the entry burn as we continue to follow along with that telemetry on the left-hand side of your screen, but front and center is that second stage engine, that Merlin vacuum engine continuing to perform.
Stage 1 FTS has safed.
And there you hear the call outs in reference to that stage 1 booster still making its way back to Earth with the altitude about 80 kilometers. Stage 2 continuing to perform, now over 15,000 kilometers an hour at an altitude of 195 kilometers above Earth. And here in just a few moments, we'll start hearing more call-outs for those entry burns coming up for the first stage. And there you can see it on the left-hand side.
And there we've got entry burn shutdown on the Falcon 9 first stage.
Both vehicles remain on nominal trajectories.
Now, the Merlins on the Falcon first stage are optimized for sea level, and these achieve 190,000 pounds of thrust each during ascent and descent. At liftoff, Falcon 9's first stage has thrust greater than 5 747 airplanes at full power. Now, the single MVAC engine on the Falcon 9 second stage has a much wider nozzle and is optimized to operate in space, producing 220,500 pounds of thrust in vacuum. Now, coming up next, we will start our landing burn on the Falcon 9 first stage in just about 40 seconds from now. Now, the landing burn is the final burn of the Falcon 9 booster, used to reduce the remaining speed of the vehicle for a gentle and precise landing on our drone ship. And we should be hearing that call out in just about 20 seconds from now. As a reminder, we'll be landing this booster on our drone ship, a short fall of gravitas.
Stage 2 is in terminal guidance.
And good call out there. We'll be landing this drone ship on our. We'll be landing this booster on our drone ship, a short fall of gravitas, currently stationed in the Atlantic Ocean.
Stage 2 FTS has safed.
And there's a good call out regarding our flight termination system. We should be hearing that call out for Falcon 9 first stage landing burn startup in right now. So there you can see it on the left-hand side of your screen.
MVAC shutdown.
And there you saw and heard the call
Nominal
out.
orbit insertion.
And there you saw and heard the call out for the successful landing of our Falcon 9 booster. Again, this was the 7th launch and landing for this first stage. We also heard the call out for SECO 1, as well as confirmation of good orbit. Now, the Stage 2 vehicle is coasting with Dragon attached, and we're about a minute away from spacecraft separation, set for, or just a few moments from now, actually, at the T+9 minute and 37-second mark. And we've got a great view of that MVAC engine on the Falcon 9 second stage. Now, as a reminder, this will be this Dragon capsule's 3rd flight to the International Space Station. And it's going to execute a series of additional burns with the Draco thrusters on its way to the station. If you're just joining us, just to recap today's mission so far, we had an on-time liftoff at 2:45 a.m. Eastern Time, and everything has proceeded nominally up to this point. At about 2.5 minutes into flight, we saw separation of the first and second stages. That was followed by the successful landing of Falcon 9's first stage on our drone ship, a short fall of gravitas in the Atlantic Ocean. Now, as a reminder, this was the 7th launch and landing for this booster. At about T+8 minutes and 30 seconds, we had a successful second engine cutoff, or SECO 1, and that was followed by confirmation of good orbital insertion. And now we're just waiting for Dragon separation from the Falcon 9 second stage. After that will be the nose cone deployment on Dragon. We're currently standing by for confirmation of Dragon separation from the Falcon 9 second stage, followed by nose cone deployment on the and we have confirmed separation of the Dragon capsule from the Falcon 9 second stage. So I'm now going to be handing you over to Joseph at NASA JSC to talk us through nose cone deployment of the Dragon capsule. Joseph?
Thank you very much, Zach. It was great to work with you and the SpaceX team once again. And as you mentioned, we're continuing to monitor the nose cone to be deployed as the hooks holding the nose cone at the tip of the spacecraft are in motion. And now once it is deployed, it will expose the 4 forward bulkhead Draco thrusters. And these Draco thrusters will execute the series of maneuvers necessary to raise the Dragon spacecraft's orbit to eventually meet up with the International Space Station. Now, immediately after the Dragon spacecraft separated from the Falcon 9, it began what we call the activation and rendezvous phase of the mission. And during this phase, Dragon is configured for on-orbit operations, and that begins after the separation from Dragon from the Falcon 9 and ends with the completion of that final co-elliptic burn. We'll touch upon those key burns that the spacecraft needs to take in order to climb itself up to catch up to the International Space Station. Now, Dragon's initial orbit today is 190 kilometers by 210 kilometers, and those numbers represent the perigee and apogee of the orbit, or the lowest and highest points over the Earth. That means the orbit for Dragon isn't a perfect circle, but more of a very slight ellipse. Now, over the next several hours after this liftoff, Dragon will execute a series of burns, which will gradually raise its orbit to align more closely to that of the International Space Station. After a successful on-time liftoff and Stage 1 and Stage 2 separation and Dragon separation, now monitoring the progress of the nose cone to open up and again expose those forward bulkhead Draco thrusters that are needed for these major burns that the Dragon spacecraft will need to catch up to the International Space Station. Now, taking a look inside the control rooms. On the left-hand side, you can see SpaceX Mission Control in Hawthorne, California, where you, Zach, were positioned, and that oversaw today's launch, and will continue to monitor Dragon on its journey to the International Space Station over the next day. And the teams you see on the right-hand side, they're here with me in Houston, the International Space Station Flight Control Room, as the teams are monitoring the orbiting complex and, of course, all the operations jointly with Hawthorne and the flight controllers there. Now, joint operations between the two teams, between SpaceX and NASA here in Houston, that'll come a little bit closer to when Dragon is in its final approach phase and about 2 hours or so prior to docking to the International Space Station. And these teams are waiting for that nose cone to again deploy, as we'll monitor the opening of that nose cone and the forward bulkhead Draco thrusters required to help stair-step its way to the International Space Station. And now got confirmation that the nose cone is in motion and starting to slowly open at the tip of the spacecraft. So with that, we'll continue to monitor and follow along with the progress of the nose cone and Dragon overall as it gets ready for those 5 major burns required to raise its orbit and catch up to the International Space Station ahead of docking. And speaking of docking, that'll take place on Monday, tomorrow, August 25th. Approximate docking time of around 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time, 6:30 a.m. Central. And of course, we'll have all the live coverage for you starting at 6 a.m. Eastern Time. Nose cone is about 25% open as we'll continue to monitor. And of course, the teams And Hawthorne and Houston continuing to monitor. And there we see a great view inside the Dragon as you see that nose cone in motion. As again, it's slowly starting to make its way open to expose those bulkhead thrusters. And again, we'll get the communications once we connect once again, but we'll return back to the views inside of Hawthorne and in Houston. But of course, the team aboard the International Space Station also monitoring today's festivities in terms of the launch as NASA's SpaceX 33rd Commercial Resupply Services mission is well on its way to the station, carrying over 5,000 pounds of science supplies to the Expedition 73 crew. As again, we're continuing to monitor the nose cone that's about 60% open. NASA astronauts Zena Cardman, Mike Fink, Johnny Kim, JAXA astronaut Kim Yui, and Roscosmos cosmonauts Oleg Platonov, Sergei Ryzhikov, and Alexei Zubritsky anxiously awaiting this delivery of over 5,000 pounds of cargo and supplies. And of course, what we talked about earlier in the broadcast, the boost kit that'll be on demonstration. And a great view of the team, the expedition crew that'll be monitoring, both Mike Fink and Johnny Kim. They will be on monitoring duties tomorrow morning. And for Mike Fink, just arrived to the International Space Station on August 2nd as a part of Crew 11. And this past Tuesday, celebrated 400 days in space, his cumulative total, as Fink on board the International Space Station in his fourth flight. As we continue to follow along with the nose cone, as it's about 80 to 85% open as we continue to track here in Houston, along with the teams in SpaceX. We mentioned earlier that there will be 5 key burns once the nose cone is open, and the thrusters are exposed. That first one happens about 45 minutes after launch. That is the phase burn that helps raise the orbit of Dragon. And then the boost burn, close co-elliptic burn, transfer burn, and then the final co-elliptic burn is what's going to set the stage for docking. And that's when the approach initiation burn will come into play. And it looks like the nose cone is nearly completely open. We'll stand by for the call out. And there you heard it as the nose cone has opened, and you see a great view of the curvature of the Earth as the Cargo Dragon spacecraft now well on its way to the International Space Station. And again, the docking anticipated tomorrow morning at approximately 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time, as the teams both in Hawthorne on the left-hand side and in Houston will monitor the progress and those 5 key burns that'll happen over the next several hours ahead of the anticipated docking time. Now that we have confirmation that the nose cone is deployed and Dragon is ready for those phasing burns to the International Space Station with a successful orbital insertion and launch today, I'm now joined on console here in Houston's Mission Control in the International Space Station Flight Control Room by Bill Spetch, the International Space Station Operations Integrations Manager. Bill, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, good to be here.
We discussed key components and objectives for this mission for NASA's SpaceX's 33rd CRS Commercial Resupply Services mission, and one of those keys is the boost kit that is on board the Dragon and in the trunk. Can you explain how this system works and what advantages it offers compared to the traditional reboosts that the International Space Station participates in?
Yeah, of course. So in this case, we have propellant tanks and a couple of Draco engines that are installed in the trunk of the Dragon. Normally, we would have some other external science or external cargo in that trunk area, but for this mission, we put propellant tanks and thrusters. And what that allows us to do is, once it gets to space station, we'll be able to raise the orbit of the space station using these 2 thrusters that are in the back. And what that means to us is we don't have to use up life on thrusters that are on board the International Space Station. So using a spacecraft that comes up and goes away and can be refurbished or flown anew, you get an advantage of not using the hardware that stays on the International Space Station, as we've been flying for a very long time, as you know.
Now, this commercial resupply services mission also brings a suite of advanced 3D printing experiments, including bioprinting of medical implants, metal printing, and tissue engineering as a part of some of the science and highlights of the research that we featured earlier in today's broadcast as well. But certainly that has a critical perspective on how these capabilities are for long-duration exploration missions, say to the moon and eventually on to Mars. What steps are being taken to scale and take a look at these technologies for deep space missions and its value to be done here closer to home aboard the International Space Station?
Yeah, there are a couple aspects, obviously. So we gain a lot of advantages in microgravity in our 3D printing, especially of tissues and things of that nature that can really help us in medical advances. When you look at like the metal 3D printing, when you get out to the moon and Mars, when you're a long ways away from Earth, and you don't have the same amount of resupply, even on board the ISS, our resupply happens every couple of months, and so we have to fly things occasionally. When you get out to Mars, obviously you can't just fly something up there and have it there. So being able to print out tools or components or anything else that we need is critical for us to be able to survive on the surface of the moon or even on Mars.
And it's exciting to see what's going to come of those research and investigations as they unfold. And I know as Dragon has made its way up to orbit and begins to track down the International Space Station again with the targeted docking of tomorrow morning at approximately 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Well, with that too, Bill, you talked about the International Space Station and experience in operation for quite some time, celebrating the station's 25th anniversary of human presence this coming November. How do missions like this commercial resupply services mission continue to showcase the station's capabilities and its role in advancing this science, this technology, and the future of exploration?
Yeah, we get a suite of experiments that we get to bring up every time a resupply mission comes to the ISS. We keep it functioning through spares and obviously the supplies for the crew, but ultimately it leads to that research that we get to do on board, and we have been doing for 25 years on board with crew. And what that allows us to do is really advance our knowledge and advance the leading edge of technology that allows us to step out further.
Well, Bill, I know that you and the team, especially those that have been around to see the construction of the International Space Station, anxious to celebrate that milestone. Again, that's coming up November 2nd of this coming year. Bill Spetch, International Space Station Operations Integrations Manager, joining us on console. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And with that, let's check back in with Zach and the team at SpaceX.
Thanks, Joseph. Dragon will now begin its journey toward the International Space Station, executing a series of phasing burns to gradually close the distance, with docking targeted for August 25th at 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time. We'd like to thank NASA for entrusting us with today's mission. SpaceX is honored to be a part of NASA's Commercial Resupply Services initiative. And, of course, congratulations again to the teams on another successful launch. Now, to stay up to date with all of our upcoming missions, be sure to check out spacex.com/launches for schedules and follow @SpaceX on X. We also recently rolled out a new departure board on the SpaceX website that features our upcoming launches, so be sure to check that out. Additionally, you can tune in for the 10th flight of SpaceX's Starship launching from Starbase, Texas later today. The 60-minute launch window for that test flight opens at 6:30 p.m. Central Time, and we'll have live coverage starting about half an hour before liftoff. So that'll do it for me here at SpaceX. Thank you much for tuning in. Back to you, Joseph.
Thank you so much, Zach. And as always, it's been a pleasure to team up with you and share this launch morning with you as the NASA SpaceX 33rd Commercial Resupply Services mission is well on its way to the International Space Station. Now, we hope you will join us on NASA Plus, Netflix, Amazon Prime, and more for our coverage of the final approach and docking of the spacecraft beginning at 6 a.m. Eastern Time tomorrow, Monday, August 25th, for a docking expected near around 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Be sure to visit nasa.gov for the latest updates on our coverage and expected docking times as we follow the operations all throughout the next few hours. With Dragon now safely on its way to the orbiting laboratory, that wraps up this morning's coverage of NASA and SpaceX's 33rd Commercial Resupply Services launch. Until next time, this is Mission Control Houston.